Thank you so much for joining us today. Today, we are pleased to be co-sponsoring our event with the American Arab Anti-Discrimination Committee, and we are honored to welcome the chairman of the board, Dr. Thafer. Give him a round of applause. Thank you. It's also my privilege to introduce this extraordinary panel titled The Impact of the Arab-Muslim Ban on Migration, which addresses a timely issue that is a domestic one but very much linked to the international community and the Gulf region. Among many promises made by now President Donald Trump during his first campaign, his early calls to block entry of Muslims to the United States was perhaps amongst the most controversial. However, amidst promises to build a wall, which has not happened, or repeal and replace the Affordable Care Act, which also has not happened, the Trump administration has successfully followed through on his promise to what was coined as the Muslim ban, or as he put it, a total and complete shutdown of Muslims entering the United States. This was one of his administration's priority policies when he entered the White House. After his first two executive attempts were struck down by the courts, the third iteration of the so-called Muslim ban was upheld by the Supreme Court in a 5-4 decision in June of last year, effectively barring entry for Syrians, Libyans, Yemenis, Iranians, Venezuelans, and North Koreans. For many Americans on either side of this debate, reactions to the Muslim ban speak to the complex amalgamation of ideals that the liberal world purports to hold: acceptance, tolerance, religious freedom, and protection, and with some of its darkest reactions to perceived threats: discrimination, stereotyping, isolationism, and ultranationalism. Rolled into these debates are conversations regarding the limits of executive authority, the Constitution, and the role of the Congress. And of course, these tensions are not limited to the United States, as witnessed also in Europe. Even further, this debate resonates in the conflict-ridden Middle East itself, where wealthy nations in the Gulf have faced criticism for failing to accept refugees from their neighboring nations. Perhaps then, the irony underlying this entire dynamic is the fact that many of the scenarios in place, such as in Yemen, Libya, Syria, and Iraq, forcing mass migrations of their citizenry, are in part a result of the decisions made in the United States foreign policies and the actors in the Gulf region pursuing regime change and proxy wars in these very nations. Yet, none of these countries, including the United States, are the top of the refugee hosting countries. Although there is a necessity to have a carefully formed immigration policy, it is in the national security interest to be responsible and accountable and address some of the root causes. There are 41.3 million displaced people due to conflict, according to the United Nations. 41.3 million. And until the United States, leader of the free world, starts approaching this issue holistically and stop punishing the victims suffering as a result of conflict-inducing decisions often made outside of their capitals. This conversation is inseparable from the conversation regarding privilege and access globally. Papers have become determinants of your access to resources, freedom of movement, and rights to security. A document often inherited by birth can cause a path dependency for your life's trajectory. This does not deny that having citizenship or documentation is not important, but the international community needs to address some of the institutionalized discrimination that comes with such a system. Pivoting back to the conversation about the United States, when we see a person of color, such as a Muslim migrant from Libya, escaping a war arguably caused by US policy decisions, and we see them as a threat, and then we see, let's say, a white immigrant from Eastern Europe, let's say from Russia, maybe arguably an antagonistic country, and we say, oh, they're here to pursue the American dream, there are clear biases inherent in these perspectives, and if policymakers start addressing the root causes instead of being reactionary to the symptoms, then the US and the international community as a whole would be more secure. On that note, we have actually, I'm not an expert on immigration policies, but we do have a panel here that's assembled that are very much qualified to discuss these issues. So they will be addressing the following imperative questions related to this. What are the implications of the Muslim ban for the United States' relationship with the broader Islamic world? What are the ongoing legal and policy challenges to the ban? Where do efforts stand to overturn the Arab and Muslim ban? And how has the ban affected people from Yemen and Iraq and Iran? What allowed Iraq to eventually be accepted from the ban? And has the ban had consequences for United States foreign policy in the Muslim world? In what ways has the grassroots community collaborated in order to challenge the ban? Without further ado, I will introduce to you our excellent panel. We have Abed Ayoub. He's the legal policy director at the American Arab Anti-Discrimination Committee. We have Dr. Erdoan Shipoli. He's a visiting researcher at Georgetown University School of Foreign Service. He's sitting at the end. Abed is here at the beginning. And in the middle, we have Alzayat. He's the CEO of Engage, which is a Muslim political and advocacy organization here in the US. So we will go ahead and start the conversation with Abed.
The underlying basis for the ban starts back under President Nixon in 1972. After the Munich Games, he implemented what's called Operation Boulder. And our organization filed a FOIA request in 2008 on Operation Boulder, and we received hundreds of documents in return. And this program implemented by the government, in short, targeted Arab visitors to the U.S. The language we received in the memos basically said 100% customs checks on Arabs coming in, cancellation of student visas on Arab nationals coming in, surveillance of pro-Palestinian student groups. So it's echoing a lot of what we saw, a lot of what we heard from Donald Trump on the campaign trail. And after Richard Nixon, we had Jimmy Carter, who implemented a ban as well on Iranian students coming in after the Iranian hostage situation in the late 70s. So there was a ban on Iranian students coming in. They were targeted. They were approached by INS at the time and approached by law enforcement at the time. And the basis for these actions by the presidents was Section 212F and the section Donald Trump used to implement the Muslim ban most recently. Reagan went after Libyan students and Libyan nationals. Bush won and Clinton banned. There was a period after the Gulf War where Iraqi and Kuwaiti nationals were banned from receiving visas into the U.S. George Bush implemented the NSEERS program, which was a forced registry program where individuals from the young males from the 22 Arab nations had to provide fingerprints at designated facilities across the country, which within itself, we're still feeling the effects, because if an individual did not give their fingerprints or did not abide by those regulations, then they had consequences on their immigration status. That leads us to Obama, who implemented measures against the visa waiver program and denied access to the visa waiver program for individuals that may have visited Lebanon, visited Syria or Sudan, or have gone to Iran. So the anti-Arab, anti-Muslim sentiment in immigration has been there. This is not new. What Donald Trump did was unmask the broken policies we have. And the ban itself could have been worse. The NSEERS program, luckily, a few weeks before Obama left office, ADC and others, we took an initiative to get the NSEERS program completely repealed and off the books. And they did that about January 3rd or 4th. Obama repealed the regulation which allowed for the NSEERS program. And that's important because if you go back and read the first Muslim ban, there was a line in there that called for registration of Arab nationals in the U.S. What Trump was intending on doing was having chaos at the airports and at the same time forcing Arab nationals that are in the U.S. to register, and that would have included individuals from the Gulf and countries not listed on the ban. So they were going for a double impact, and they were trying to drain the advocacy groups and the community in this. So we know what their intention was. So by repealing the regulation, then he has no option. So why is that important? Why is repealing the regulation important? Why is NCERS the answer? Moving forward, the Muslim ban is authority. The president has authority to implement such a ban. And Donald Trump may have implemented against these 7 countries. The next president could be a Democrat, Republican. By the way, we're nonpartisan, so we don't take positions. So let's say a Democrat comes in next and says, okay, we're going to remove these 7 countries. Oh, but wait, you know what? India is a problem. They can place India back on the list. So we still have an issue. You still have the regulation in place. And until that regulation is removed, there's always going to be the prospect or the possibility that a president could come in and implement the same type of ban in the future. Until we overhaul and fix the complete, the immigration system as a whole, we're always going to have this. And the issues facing the Arab community, the Muslim community here, particularly when it comes to the ban, are part of the anti-immigrant rhetoric. In addition to the ban, which has had a profound impact, and I'm sure you all heard the stories, you've read the articles, individuals from Yemen, from Iran, from Syria, trying to come here to be reunited with their families, trying to come here for medical treatment, being denied access. The waiver process, which my colleague Wael will get into, is not really a process in itself. So they're ongoing problems. They're not the sexiest of stories. They're not going to be every story, there's a life-threatening condition and it's like a movie where we have to get them in. They're simple, everyday folks trying to live their life, coming here for normal reasons, for everyday things we take for granted. Medical treatment, schooling opportunities, visiting family, going to different landmarks, visiting Disney World with their kids. So it's regular everyday things that they're being barred from doing. In addition to the ban, and what really impacts a number of the countries not specifically listed and a number of the Gulf countries, is what we're calling the backdoor Muslim ban and the backdoor Arab ban. And that is the strengthening and the tightening of visa restrictions. So what we've been dealing with over the past few months, which has been in the media, are individuals, let's say we've been dealing with individuals from Qatar and Kuwait and Gulf countries who are coming here for school on their F1 visa. And as soon as they get to the port of entry, they're told, give us your cell phone. They view their cell phone. They find a few pictures and messages in WhatsApp. Well, we don't like this. How's this message get to your phone? What's on your social media? What's your view of America? What mosque does your family go to? And if they don't like the answer, those visas are canceled. So we are seeing backdoor approaches attacking folks that already have visas. They're making it more difficult to get a visa. They're restricting hours at embassies. They're delaying. They're removing online inquiry forms. They're forcing you now to call an 800 number, which as attorneys you could sit on the phone waiting 3-4 hours to get information. So it's all these little things the administration is doing it to make it more difficult for immigrants to come in here. So yes, the Muslim ban is problematic. It's very problematic, but it's just one action of many that this administration is taking to restrict the flow of brown immigrants, of Muslim immigrants and Arab immigrants into the U.S. The efforts to overturn the ban need to be focused on legislation. And again, I'm strictly nonpartisan here, but if you will need a control of the House, Senate, and White House to implement a move where you're removing and changing the INA code and you're removing regulations. And this is a step up from what we've been able to accomplish. This is a harder challenge and one that will require a lot of political pressure. You can bet that the administration now, or the current Senate, I'm just checking how much time I have left, but the current Senate makeup will not implement and will not restrict Donald Trump's Muslim ban. It's going to keep going. The fear we have at our organization is if there is another 4 years of these immigrant policies, the ban could be expanded. Other measures could be taken into place. You could see quotas on student visa holders. You could see quotas on visas from specific countries. So, and it's all done, again, in the name of national security. And it all goes back to the initial plan Richard Nixon implemented. It all goes back to that Operation Boulder and the initial knee-jerk reaction on Arabs. One anecdote is, and I'm pulling this from a chapter for a book I wrote, in the mid-'80s, Ronald Reagan implemented, had what was called an ABC committee. And this committee was used to look at how to restrict the flow, specifically of Arabs and Muslims into the U.S. And they produced a document. This is the document that led to the LA 8 charges, which many in this room are familiar with out in California. This document disappeared in the 90s. Nobody paid attention to it. When Trump came back into the White House, his folks that were around with the neocons and the right-wing extremists that were around in the 80s dusted it off, and they're using it as the guideline, as the blueprint for his policies. So a lot of what Trump is doing is not necessarily new. It's not necessarily all on him. He may not even care what's happening. It is part of a larger structure and bigger problems we're facing when it comes to overhauling this immigration system. So all I ask is, moving forward, if the administration does change, we don't breathe a sigh of relief. We have to keep the same momentum going. We have to keep the same tenacity and the same focus on equality and the same focus on preserving the rights of all immigrants, or else we're going to fall into the same trap, regardless of whether or not a Democrat or Republican's in office. So.
The Muslim ban is the law of the land, obviously, and we all remember the protests at the airports and the media coverage. The fact of the matter, as you keep hearing from non-right-wing pundits, is that the argument that it's about national security is utterly ridiculous because the facts just do not back it up. I worked on refugee vetting. I worked on the Syrian asylum and refugee situation that really became an international crisis in the winter of 2015 when the Russian Air Force and the Syrian regime Air Force were bombing hundreds of thousands of Syrians out of their cities. That's how it started. And many of them went to Turkey, and eventually Turkey, for whatever reasons, could not hold 3 million people, opened the gates to Europe. That precipitated that crisis. At the same time, Trump, who at best is a friend of the Russian government and Putin specifically, made his famous announcement that we need a complete shutdown of Muslims. It happened that same month. If you look back, those statements were made when Aleppo was being bombed by the Russians. And that entire episode needs to be seen within a broader context of right-wing politicians using the fear of immigrants and refugees, asylum seekers for political gains. This has been now used successfully from Hungary by the Orbán government through the Brexit fiasco that the UK is still dealing with specifically the fear of Muslim and brown refugees overwhelming the UK. It's been used by far-right politicians in France to win seats, in Belgium, in Germany, in Sweden, and all the way here in the United States. I mean, there's a reason Donald Trump used it. Whether he believes it or not, it politically works. It's his number one agenda item, and the number one reason most of his base supports him. It's preventing non-white, non-Christian, non-Anglo-European, etc. Immigrants from coming to the United States. And he's going to continue using it. So it's very important to understand that context. But the fact of the matter is that 0 people have ever been killed by nationals of those countries since 1975. 0. It's important to understand that within a terrorism context, obviously. By comparison, 1.5 million Americans, 1.5 million, have died from gun-related incidents, according to the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, since 1968. 1.5 million, 0. You would think if there was going to be a policy designed to protect us, it would look at the 1.5 million. But that's not the case. So this is a political issue. It's not a security issue. We can argue about the racism piece. Who knows what's in the heart of people, right? But it's a political issue. And when the issue went to the Supreme Court, eventually they made the security argument and said, by the way, if you have nothing to fear and you've not committed any crimes, there's a waiver process that you can pursue. And by the way, we're going to also add some non-Muslim countries to prove that it is not targeted at Muslims. So we add Venezuela, we add North Korea, we take out Iraq, and we take out Sudan. Now, as somebody who's worked on national security for 10 years, That's pretty crazy to be able to do just such arbitrary changes, if they're indeed based on security, so quickly. I mean, what's the cause? What's the reason for the switch? I mean, I hear Sudan has some issues. Why did we take it off? And by the way, I mean, we just obviously had the September 11 memorial yesterday. None of these attackers came from those countries. Yet Trump was silent on that nation, whether it should be added or not. This was window dressing implemented or put in place for the third iteration, because the administration had to go 3 times at this, finally before the Supreme Court. But even that window dressing is, when you just dig beneath the surface, you discover it's utterly BS. Because Venezuelans are actually still allowed to come here. It's certain government officials who are banned from coming here. Certain government officials. We don't know who that is, but some. We've always denied North Koreans the ability to come here, by the way. There's nothing new there. The waiver process also is extremely unclear and shrouded in secrecy. All it says is you got to provide that, prove that there's undue hardship to you, that you as a person do not pose a threat, and that the person granting them entry would be in our national interest. Not much more than that has been said about it. So it's very arbitrary, and as a result, surprise, surprise, only 5.1% of the thousands of people who have applied for the waiver have been granted a waiver. 5.1%, which, let's see, so cumulatively, you're looking at about an 84% reduction in visas being granted to people from those countries, specifically Iran, Libya, Somalia, Syria, Yemen, 84%. As of January 1, 2019, the ban has kept an estimated 3,700 spouses or fiancés from the United States. It has kept an estimated 5,500 adopted children of U.S. citizens from entering the country. Adopted children just can't be with their parents. And obviously the figure includes a lot of other stories that you always hear about, grandmothers who cannot come here to attend a wedding, somebody who wants to be reunited with their cousin, just your friends who you have not seen in 10 years. Even people with valid visas in the United States from those countries are terrified to ever leave because they're afraid they will not be allowed to come back. I mean, imagine just knowing that there's no way in hell you're going to step foot outside the United States as long as Donald Trump is in power. It could be next year, it could be another 5 years. According to Senator Van Hollen, whom we work with, the administration repeatedly swore to the Supreme Court and the American people that this was not a de facto Muslim ban and that there was a clear waiver process. That couldn't be further from reality. Just because the program exists, it doesn't mean that it's legal and that the ban is being carried out in good faith. In fact, and I was looking this up just earlier, Justice Kennedy, who provided the decisive 5th vote in the decision to uphold the ban, by the way, the vote was 5-4, and it seems everything now is 5-4 because of the politicization of the Supreme Court in this country. He authored a separate concurrence, specifically highlighting the point that the policy was valid only if it wasn't a vehicle for religious bigotry. And the evidence of the matter now clearly points that there is a discriminatory policy in place by its very application or lack thereof. Because of the near exclusive focus on Muslims, because of who they are and not what they do, remember I said 0 people have been killed in terrorist attacks by nationals of those countries, it's discriminatory, pure and simple. And it's unfair because as U.S. citizens, we have every right, like anyone else of any religion and no religion, to have our family and loved ones visit us whenever we want, at any time, unless they pose a real security threat that's been demonstrated, or they have shown the likelihood of them overstaying their visa, which is also legitimate to bar somebody from coming here. If you think they're going to come here and never leave, they shouldn't come here legally. Except of those 2 criterias, it is completely unfair as an American citizen to witness our loved ones being denied coming here just because of their religion. And just because it's not every single Muslim country, the majority of those excluded are being Muslim under this. And it's very important to put this in the broader context I mentioned earlier. This is not a US only problem. This is not a Western world problem. These policies, tactics, and rhetoric now is spreading. It's spreading to India. It's spreading to Kashmir. It's spreading to Burma. It's spread to Arab countries vis-a-vis other minorities. It's happening in Lebanon. It's happening in Turkey now. This is an international problem. The rhetoric used by politicians who simply want to win elections or make money on the backs of minorities, it's an international epidemic that we really need to confront. What we're doing is, taking bites at it. Some people are posing legal challenges, others are educating the public. In Congress, there will be the first ever Muslim ban hearing set for September at the end of this month. And Engage and a lot of other organizations are working on supporting this effort. Can you imagine? We haven't had an actual public hearing on this effort, on this issue. People think that we did. We haven't. So there will be one, thanks to the Judiciary Committee and the Foreign Affairs Committee in the House. Clearly, it's not going to become law if there's ever any bills, because the Senate is controlled by allies of the president who will block any movement. But we're going to move the ball forward in this regards and set the stage for hopefully not only re-energizing discussion of the issue, but position it for a bill or law that will seek to ensure that no future president can do this ever again. Thank you.
It's difficult to summarize everything in 10 minutes about the securitization of Islam in this country and its effect in foreign policy. So these are two topics of big volumes of books, but I'll just try to hit on some points. Okay, I'll just try to hit at some points. Now, securitization of Islam in U.S. foreign policy is neither unique nor new. Securitization of a political issue means when that issue becomes a security issue independently, or it is constructed as a security issue independently if it really is a security issue or not. And American foreign policy has tangoed with securitization of Islam for centuries. We all know about the accusation that Obama is a Muslim and that he should not be elected. But one of the facts is also that he was not the first president to be accused of being a Muslim. It was Thomas Jefferson that was accused of being a Muslim when he ran for president. So this is not something new or something unique. Nevertheless, there is one thing that is important for a security, for a political issue to become a security issue or being securitized, is that the audience or the public accepts it and lets the government, the politicians, use any means, any extraordinary means that they wouldn't use normally to tackle that issue. And that is important. Now, securitization of an issue comes with burden and with consequences. If you make something a security issue, that means that you are going to use all the means to fight that. On behalf of what? On the burden of liberties, rights, and the image that you resonate abroad. Thus, the foreign policy. All right? So, but what made securitization of Islam, especially during the Bush times, interesting was that the scale that it was securitized, it was like never before. Before, America has securitized other issues, such as, or other communities, let's say Italians, Jewish community, Irish, Japanese, and African American communities, slavery, everything, right? This is the way how countries conduct policy. And if you look at the security history of U.S. policy, you can see that the U.S. politics is very dependent on security and securitization. But with the Bush administration, Islam was securitized as a global issue, with in a scale that it wasn't securitized earlier, and that was because it was the end of the Cold War, and the people that were in the administration, they were most of them either Cold War experts, Cold War politicians, or professors of Russian studies and Russian politics, like Secretary Rice. So this is why Islam became the one that substituted the USSR, the communism, or Russia at that time. And of course, this had a lot of consequences: two Patriot Acts, violation of liberties in America, tremendous foreign policy debacle, and damage to U.S. Image there, and never-ending wars, all in the name of this war on terror that was, of course, very vague. Nevertheless, I also need to point out that whenever something is securitized, there needs to be a trigger. Like, for example, Abed now spoke about how all those policies were triggered by something that happened abroad, right? And the people were ready to accept that, either through fear, through propaganda, or because something happened, like the Iranian hostage crisis, right? Unfortunately, after the Bush administration, we have the Obama administration. I mean, it's not unfortunately we have the Obama administration. What I meant is, after that those years, we have the Obama administration who has tried to desecuritize Islam and make it a political or a social issue again, with very little, if any, success, because Islam was securitized so much globally now. It was, you either come to war with us or you're against us, that it was impossible to do that. And the situation that we are right now, you don't need me to tell you that it's not a very good situation for Muslims, but it's not also a very good situation for American liberties, right? And my co-panelists here all spoke of why that is important for domestic policies. But the effect of these in foreign policy are numerous. For example, when you securitize a particular group in a society, you make them vulnerable because you polarize them, you alienate them, right? And remember that one of the most important fabric of US power and what makes US powerful is unity. So that unity is being vulnerable. The US image abroad is deteriorating. Now the US allies, they are more worried than the Muslim majority countries. I know that many of you would expect me to speak about the fact that this ban would have it in US majority countries. No effect. Because US majority country leaders, they don't even bring this up. They condemn the ban. It's like when we send prayers and thoughts and prayers when there are gun shootings. But there's nothing done there. There is a bigger effect on US allies who now see America as unpredictable and most of the time reckless. US global politics does not have a hegemon. This is why allies are very important. In the Muslim world, the people traditionally see America as hope, despite all the news media that we have about how people in the Muslim world or people abroad might hate America or stuff like that. That's not really true. People see it as hope. But that is also changing. Okay, it is the administration is making it more difficult to get visas for people, but what is that going to cost to the US? The number of international students in the US has dropped significantly. And that's not only because of the ban, but also because of the prestige of the United States. Because of the quality of schools that some other countries are offering, like Australia and New Zealand, that you would never think about. I mean, you would think about, but not traditionally. And as someone who is in academia, there's something that also Secretary Albright said in one of the conferences. She said, look, we will never have lack of bureaucrats in this country. But the problem is that what kind of quality are we going to have the next generation? Do the best people want to go to work for the government? Or are we going to elect from not the best students? And it's the same with the international students. You will always have international students, people that want to come to study in America. But are you going to get the best one of the best, as you guys always get, used to get at least? And finally, the biggest criticism towards the US from the people in the Middle East, from the people of Africa, from the underdeveloped countries, is that the US is supporting those dictatorship regimes and not their democracy. They are supporting their autocrats, right? So what does this ban tell them? The people cannot enter, but the leaders of those countries can.